What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another week of the GZ Chop Shop Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Greg, joined by my good friend and fellow host, Daniel. If you remember, Patrick started a little thing there, so Daniel he's our fellow host. But as always, today we have an amazing episode lined up for you because we are joined by the Chief Advisor of Services for Midwest Games. Her impressive career spans 20 years, including working as an executive for Bungie and 2K Games. She's led the charge for tons of gaming projects, from publishing, content acquisitions, platform relationships, sales, marketing. Honestly, the list goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth Howard of Midwest Games. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, y'all. I'm happy to be here.
So we are honored to have you here. When I first got the email Sean sent the email and I saw that you had worked for Bungie and 2K, I immediately got excited because I was like, I have tons of questions that I want to ask about your time there. First, I want everyone to get familiar with you and ask, how did you get involved in the gaming industry? What was the starting point for you?
Yeah, I have sort of just a fortuitous story. I totally lucked into the games industry. So I'm from Austin, Texas. I went to the University of Texas for college. I got a psychology degree. I thought I was literally going to pursue like a PhD in behavioral psychology at one point. And then I traveled with my friends to Costa Rica, and I was like, life's too short to stay in school for 8 years. Like, I'm going to go travel. That resulted in me living in London for a little while, and I got to see what it's like to live outside the US and was like, oh, you know what? I know it's like a lot easier to like work and have a job back home in Texas. I moved back to Texas. I don't know, this was like 2003, maybe. Like I'm like 22 years old or something. And a friend of mine worked at a company called Aspire Media here in Austin, Texas. And they were tiny. There were like 20 something of them at the time. The co-founder was hiring for a role doing contract administration and front desk. So the receptionist and then helping with contract admin, something I didn't necessarily have a background in, but I'd always like worked a ton in college. And so Aspire's primary business model was licensing AAA games and then porting them to the Mac and then doing like the sales and marketing for the Mac platform. But what was really cool about it as somebody new to the industry is I got to learn all about the industry because we licensed the biggest games. So at that time, that job became working with like Activision, Ubisoft, LucasArts before they were acquired by Disney, like you name it, and identifying good games that we should bring to the Mac. And so I did those. I started mostly in business development. I pretty quickly gave up my front desk duties. Like that was not my strength, but I loved the biz dev stuff. So I grew up doing biz dev and then eventually took over all of publishing, which was also the sales, marketing, go-to-market side of the business. And then we grew into multi-platforms. So I managed the relationships with not only like Apple, obviously, which was awesome to also be a part of that rise. But as we grew into new platforms, it was Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo. So I think a big part of that growing up in the industry was like being exposed to kind of the industry at large as it's gone through all of the changes for 20 something years. And so, yeah, I got really lucky and didn't even mean to do this, didn't even know it was a real thing. And yeah, I always think of like, man, I could have ended up in insurance or something. Like I am so lucky, so lucky.
That's hilarious to me. Like you're just on a beach on a vacation. You're like, I just don't want to do that much college anymore.
Yeah,
and life
like
goes
YOLO.
Yeah,
It was like life's too short. I must experience it. And I've gotten lucky in that because I've been in this industry, I've gotten to travel a decent amount just for work and stuff. So it kind of worked out. Yeah.
So you've worked with a lot of these, major companies and major developers. What are some of the things that you've picked up over the years, like experiences, things that us as gamers, we only see the finished product. So we don't know everything that happens behind the scenes. So like, what are some of the things that are going on back there that keep the wheels turning?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because my experience was on the business side of things. Like when oftentimes if I meet somebody new, they're like, "Oh, you're in video games. Like, do you make them?" And I'm like, I'm the, like, how do you build a business plan for a business or a product and like look at sort of opportunity, cost, is there something in between? Because like that's how we all keep jobs and like keep this
Hmm.
machine going. So I think that is probably like that maturity across the board is probably one of the more interesting parts of like learning about the games industry. So once upon a time, the games industry was largely fueled by just like super creative individuals that had really cool ideas. And there were only a few ways to get those ideas made. Like back, when I told about my early days, like back in my day, back in the early 2000s when I started in this industry, you got a game made by getting a publisher to give you money. They got the rights to publish and distribute that game. You, as the developer, were on the hook to obviously deliver that game. You were probably paid some milestones that showed that you were progressing and delivering that game. And then, like, maybe you were lucky if you made anything thereafter. Like, the publisher often owned that game, that IP that you made, even if it was your creative idea. And they got most of the revenue, but keep in mind, they took most of that risk, right? Like, they were like writing the checks. And so that model over the last 20 years has gotten, I don't know how much as gamers y'all dig into like the business side of what's, games industry stuff, but there have been a number of articles recently that have sort of illustrated like what once was 5 million went to 20 million, went to 100 million. Now, like the likes of something like GTA is assumed to be like $1 billion. Like, so
Hmm.
that economics of, hey, I'm taking a bunch of risk to help a game come to market has gotten harder and harder and harder and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the harder part, I mean, it used to be you put a game on a shelf, your customer went into GameStop, they probably read about it in a magazine. Like when I started, YouTube wasn't YouTubing. Like the way that a lot of people like make their lives around games didn't exist. So it was just like a much more sort of like linear transaction journey. And now all of that has changed. And so I think that's the thing to keep in mind as a gamer is like what used to be sort of not a safe business. It's always been really hard making games because it's like a creative endeavor combined with technology that's both like constantly moving. But now we also have this audience that also is constantly moving. So it's just like it's a challenging space to make a business that is like predictable.
Hmm.
And that predictability is what gives people job security and all of the other things. So I think from the outside, it's probably like, why can't this happen? Or like, this seems so obvious. But I think the thing I would remind people of is like the growing complexity combined with how long it takes to make games. Maybe it's harder to guess. Like, it's harder to create like sound business theses, I guess.
Yeah,
So
I imagine like the modern gaming industry has an even more difficult time keeping up with trends and what's popular with
yeah.
like social media and how interconnected everyone is. Things change so frequently and on the fly.
So frequently. I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. And I think one of the things that's emerging now is like, I'd be curious, when we jumped on this call, y'all were chatting about games, and my guess is a lot of people play games like actually based on like word of mouth, like their friends literally telling them either in their
Hmm.
shared Discord, their iMessage, or like in real life, like you got to try this game. And I think as an industry, we're probably way more reliant on that than we know how to be. And like, there's not a way to like really get in there right now. So we have all these we try to communicate to our players in direct ways, but like, how do you sort of connect with that word of mouth? And like, that's kind of the crux of now, I think, a lot of discoverability that again, once upon a time, we probably relied on like billboards and magazines for.
And
Yeah.
yeah, when you said, word of mouth, I was like, yeah, that's 100% true because, just among us, a lot of the times when we like a game, we mention it was like, oh man, this game is amazing. And then one of us will be like, you know what, I got to give that game a try. And then it just trickles down from there.
Yep.
Lethal Company is a great example because
Yeah.
nobody, when that game first dropped, what was it? Was it 2 years ago? It dropped on Steam, or maybe a little bit before that. But nobody was really like, it wasn't something that was in your face. And now, a couple years later, because everyone was like, "Oh, you should play Lethal Company. You should. It's fun and friends and all this." And now it's part of a Fortnite skin. And I
Yeah.
think one guy made that Yeah,
Wow.
like it was like one or two guys that made that game.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we're seeing so much of that now is like absolute disruption coming from not always the most experienced or most funded teams and like those sort of disruptions that like honestly couldn't have existed when I started in the industry. And there are a number of like sort of gateways to where we are now, but a lot of it has to do with the ability for people to make games leveraging existing technology, be it Unity or Unreal, and then being able to access distribution. Like the only way to get on a store shelf once upon a time was to go through a publisher. Now you can you can make and publish a game yourself on Steam. So yeah, it's super interesting to see what all of that means for the business and the ecosystem and players and all of that stuff.
Now, just out of curiosity, you're with Midwest Games now, and I was reading about the shadow publishing and some of the, I guess, options that you guys are trying to have to help, I guess, gamers or creators publish their games. Is that something that you're trying to help like lone creators or maybe smaller companies with, is getting their game out there?
Yeah, exactly. Like, when we started chatting, you're like, what are, tell me about your up and comings. And I described sort of the first chunk, but I think, after I left Aspire, I went to 2K where I ran publishing production. So that was the group that basically was the intermediary between all of the games and all of the publishing functions. And so when you think of publishing, think of all the stuff that's like not technically making the game. So sales, marketing, QA, localization, technology, sometimes third-party development, analytics, all sorts of things, like everything that's not like creatively executing against the game. And so I was able to see a lot of games and studios and where sort of ideally how that engagement would work. And the big takeaway was like publishing and development are actually part of the same process. And so, when I described like back in the old days and a publisher did this and like it was far more like, and now I take the game and I do the marketing part. But now, because of all of that, who's my audience, who's my player, how do I talk to them? That stuff's got to be in lockstep from the very beginning. And so therefore publishing is a part of development. Yet because there are fewer publishers investing in game creation, there are so many people that don't have access to those publishing capabilities. So in game development now, if you want an artist or an engineer or an entire game made, you can go outsource that through a third party developer in all sorts of functions. But that same ability doesn't really exist on the publishing side. So all of that go to market stuff. And so that is the thesis behind shadow publishing, is like, how do we help serve all of those developers that are left holding that game and like, shit, who is my target audience?
Yeah.
How do I talk to them? It's like
Yeah, that
a
could
lot
be a
of
whole
work.
game changer for smaller creators and small studios, though, that don't have all these different resources and outlets for them.
Yeah, it's
That's
completely
amazing.
critical. Like it's a critical part of it. And a lot of times people, we can name a lot of examples of people who figured it out how to do it really well by themselves. But then we can also talk about thousands of others that didn't. And like in that lump of the thousands of others that didn't will be examples of like good games that didn't have the right sort of like player strategy or community building or publishing plan to reach that audience. And so that's the gap that shadow publishing is hoping to fill. Yeah.
So I also, with Midwest Games and shadow publishing, one of the biggest things that stood out to me on your site is that the developers, they retain the rights to their games. So I wanted to ask, is losing ownership of a game a bigger issue than developers realize when they're entering this industry? And say a publisher comes to them and says, hey, we'll publish your game, we'll write the checks, we'll do XYZ. And then, a lot of developers are like, hey, this is my dream getting realized, I'm jumping at it. And they don't understand that once they give that game to the publisher, that it's the publisher's game and no longer theirs. Is that a bigger issue than, new developers realize?
I'll be honest, I think in the modern days, like how we approach that, and I'm going to get kind of like boring and legal on you, is through first right negotiations. So back in the day, it would have been more like sign your rights away sort of agreement where like you literally don't have ownership. Now a lot of that is entered in a little bit more collaboratively because it's pretty frowned upon, like in sort of the modern publishing era. So the way those parties protect themselves are through like the first right. Like I have the first right to make a sequel if I'm the developer, and as a publisher I have the first right to your next game, and then we have a bunch of terms on like what happens if we don't come to an agreement versus like the outright like it's mine no matter what. But I will say part of the attractiveness also of the no IP model is like if you're a developer that's taken on equity funding, meaning somebody's given you money to exist as a studio, then you really want to be specific and like protecting your rights to your game, your IP, and your ongoing revenue. So part of shadow publishing is also not just the IP rights, but the future revenue. So while we might do a revenue share, it's usually really small compared to what a typical publishing structure might look like.
So what would be advice you would give to, say, someone like me? I'm actually toying with the idea of creating a game in the future.
Cool.
And thank you. And, I've been pulling the pieces together, and as you would have it, I have no idea what direction I would go after it's, let's say, done. So what would be the advice you would give me?
Well, first of all, you already started on the wrong foot by saying when you were done. Remember, I already lectured about this being like part of the same process. So step one is do what you can to understand like what it means to publish a game right now. So by that, I mean Steam. I think the statistic, and I'm probably going to botch it, but somebody could correct me. The statistic is something like Steam launched as many games in one day in 2024 as they did in the entire year of 2014. So the competition for finding an audience is like insane. So that means that you as a developer, you better be like solving a player's problem with your game idea, or else like why would they stop what they're already doing that they love to like come play your game? So there's like an element of just like understanding the ecosystem, understanding who your player is, and understanding like what are your options for like building that community that I think are really important just in like codifying your idea. Because if you remember, I love that whole like, what's the opportunity? What are my costs? In between is how you like have a pay rent and have food, right? So it's important to not like make a game that's so expensive that you'll never make your money back, or else that'll be the one and only game you ever make. And then I think it's also learning about the ecosystem in terms of like, because Steam is so big, it's largely become a platform of algorithms. So the way that you get exposure on Steam is by having a big community. How do you get that community? You have to think of like, what are these like numbers I need to hit to get enough momentum that people even know I exist? You may have an advantage because you already have a community, right? Like there are some options for people who are making games to try to like de-risk, increase their odds of like finding an audience. One of those is often like licensing IP. Like, okay, cool. People know what I'm talking about the second I tell them it's blah, blah, blah game. Or leveraging an audience, partnering with somebody who already has like people you can talk to. But I think that, understanding who your audience is, knowing how you're solving a problem for them, and then building a plan to bring them into your development process is how you start building some of that momentum that you can start like getting the bells and whistles and getting more and more visibility and hopefully finding an audience for your game. Yeah.
So one of my follow-up questions is, so how do you plan, and I'll try to detail my thoughts here. How do you plan for the future? So say you're building, you start your game and the problem you want to solve for gamers today, but with how rapidly gaming is changing and how long game development can take, how do you keep that momentum if the gamers' problems change? Say, look at GTA. Yeah. GTA has been trying to launch for like 5 years and it keeps moving.
At this point, I feel like they're just doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
Building that anticipation.
So, how can you plan for that if your game takes like 5 years, and say in 5 years, like I make a battle royal, but 3 years from now, battle royals have run their course. Everyone's exhausted and turn-based is the new thing. So how do you plan for that?
Yeah, I think that there's a ton of examples where companies have like fallen victim to exactly the thing that you're saying. At least on the AAA side, where games are so big, they take that long to develop that the market's shifted. But on like sort of the more agile, smaller games, by that I mean more like smaller both in scope, but also time that it takes to make them. Well, and actually my answer is probably the same in either scenario is, and this again, like I'm going to apologize for getting too nerdy about some of this businessy
No,
production-y
Go
stuff.
nerd
for it.
away.
But I'm like a big believer in having like a strong thesis around like what are you doing? And having that be like a description not only of the game you're making, like so the creative ambition, but also the business ambition. So like I think I'm making a turn-based robot game that does that I'm able to like have RPG elements that allow me to give people amazing achievements for accomplishing super hard things that will reach the blah 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 and blah 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 audience for within this amount of time and budget and this many players. So somewhere in there, you've got like your creative ambition, your business ambition, and your business constraint. You've got this hypothesis now that you're anchored around, like, okay, I think this is where we're going. And then the process of making your game is like testing your hypothesis, almost like you're a mad scientist. So like, am I making that thing? Like, am I doing what I said I was going to do? Am I doing it at the time? Like, am I on track, like in terms of my time and my pacing, but like getting it done in time? And are they still there? Like, am I like, is my thesis, is my hypothesis about who's going to play this game? Like, is that true? And so ways that you can test that part are through player feedback, user research, that kind of stuff, like testing that like community interest in that way. So that's kind of my nerdy like description of, I think, the way to kind of keep a tap on, is this going to still work? You can't just like have the hypothesis and be like, and now I'm going to work for 6 years and now I'm done.
Yeah.
Because like, you'll be wrong.
Basically, you can't
I
put
love
blinders.
this because when I think of the gaming industry and I think of running someone who might be in charge of different parts of the game development or whatever, I think business, you think someone might just be doing their job because that's their job, but you sound so passionate about this. Like you just really love it. And I just feel like that's really awesome.
Well, thank you. I mean, I will say, like, I have this really weird ambition of just like, how do we create like a sustainable industry where people can do the thing they love and like keep doing it for years and years and years versus some of the volatility we've definitely seen over time. And I think a lot of that comes with sort of maturing business practices and also this concept of like aligning teams around goals. So this is like alignment at the company level, at the studio level, but even within projects and features. So after I left 2K, I was like, why is it so hard to make games? Because I'd never worked at a studio. I was just like naive to what it's like to work on the studio side. And I was lucky enough to join Bungie as VP of production and got to understand like what it's like to make games at a huge, large scale. And you see like, holy cow, like connecting the work that everybody does to what the goal is. It's freaking hard when you're talking about tons and tons of people. You'll find out, Gregory, that it's even hard for like a few people. And so like I'm passionate about trying to build like systems and ambition around that, like getting everybody like marching toward the same goals, understanding what they are and having that show up in the work so that you're more likely to like achieve that goal and ambition. It probably still won't work 100% of the time. Like it is still a hypothesis. We're still running science experiments, but I think like you have a better shot on goal.
And since, mentioning hypothesis, and I guess this is kind of like a tough question. When a game fails and it's gone through the process, it's gone through all the steps, the first thing, the knee-jerk reaction for gamers is it was the developer's fault. Developers put out a crappy game. And it's like, there's so many things that happen in between before it gets to the gamer. What are your thoughts on why a game actually fails when it finally gets out to the audience, despite going through all of those processes, all of those channels? What can really lead to a game's, downfall?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is like a million things, but also fundamentally, not all games go through all that stuff that I just talked about. In fact, it's pretty rare for there to be that level of alignment within creative teams around what the business goals are. Like certainly in mobile, yes. Like when you're talking about a live game, active development, and you're like running KPIs on some mobile game, like they probably have a lot they could teach me about this side of things. But in the more traditional AAA space, and especially of people who grew up like I did, like the last 20 years, as I described, like it's almost like you're talking to a dinosaur in terms of the industry that I started in. Like it's just like unrecognizable. But a lot of the leaders who are in their mid 40s or whatever, like they found success doing that thing, doing the thing where I have an idea and I'm going to be the creative leader and I'm just going to tell everybody what my vision is. And then then marketing will go market that thing. And that's how we succeed. So there's a big shift still happening in the industry of getting to this like player focused development. And what does that mean? What does it mean to like know who your customer is and build them in? What do these constraints mean? It's like, it's actually not somebody trying to be an asshole and tell me no. It's like us trying to actually succeed toward the goal of like, we get to all keep doing this, right? So I think we actually haven't been doing that process much or consistently in the industry. And then I think there's like and because of that, there's a number of misses, right? And I think sometimes it's creative leaders, like if you've been incredibly successful doing something a certain way, who's going to tell you you're wrong? Like, because it's like, you haven't been wrong yet, you know? So that's one, just like deference, which a lot of people deserve. There's a lot of, I've done this where you have success and you're like, I'm so smart. And then you do the same thing again. And then it's like, oh shit, that didn't go the
It
same
didn't work.
way. So like, there was a lot of luck in my success. And you don't learn that honestly until you fail a little bit, right? And so there's like probably some really good metaphor or adage of like success hides all sins or whatever. But yeah, there's so many reasons. There's like not knowing who your audience is. There's a lot of good Substacks on some of this, like people who will like post more their own failures and they're like, I couldn't describe what my game was in like a sentence. And like, if you can't tell your friend, oh, you got to try blah, 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 it's da, da, da. Like you probably don't have the hook in your game either. You know, it's not
Elevator
just hard.
pitch.
Yep. And not in the cheesy way, but like really in the simple, like, oh, I get why I want to play that, you know? So many reasons.
I like how you mentioned success hiding the sin, because the first company that came to mind is Nintendo.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, Nintendo gets away with so much crap, but we love them.
Because they just crush it for 30 years or whatever, 40 years or yeah.
And I think they have that mentality, like, who's going to tell me I'm wrong? I've been around for over 100 years.
Right.
You hate to love them.
Yeah, you hate to love them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, they did do a Wii U at one point. Like, it wasn't a total miss, but they're like only perfect.
Yeah.
They've done a little, but yeah. I mean, they've been such innovators.
Didn't the Wii sell better than all the other?
The Wii was awesome, but then there was like the weird interstep between the Wii and the Switch, which was the Wii U, that just didn't kind of hit the same.
Okay, yeah,
you know what I mean?
Totally
like,
forgot about that.
I'm probably being unnecessarily harsh on Nintendo.
I contributed to that little misstep.
We like to be harsh sometimes on some of the things that go on. On a different note, when you're not, trying to make a game successful or preparing it to be successful, what are you doing on the side? Do you have, do you game a lot yourself? Do you have any particular hobbies that nobody would know about otherwise?
Man, this one's tough. I'm a single mom. I'm raising 2 teenage boys. I've got a college-age kid and a high school kid. And so that's a lot of my life. And I'm a little bit of a gym rat and I love to travel and hang out with my friends. Like my gaming propensity, this is where I'm always like, I never want to admit it, but it's true. Like I don't play a lot of games. Like I'm not good at 3D game. Like I can't just like go play a shooter. There's so many things I'm bad at when it comes to gaming. I'm more of like a nerd about like consuming like what's going on out there. And what are the big plays that different companies are making and just kind of like armchair quarterbacking. Like, oh, that doesn't seem like a good idea. And then seeing if I'm right over years.
You don't say anything, just watch it. And then you're like, I was right.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I live a pretty like normal mom life outside of this games industry stuff.
But are your sons gamers?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
I'm just thinking,
it's interesting. Yeah.
How amazing is it that, you're not a big gamer, but you walk by, they're playing a game and you can go and be like, yeah, I remember when I worked on that.
Yeah, I mean, my older son used to know Life Destiny too, so that was pretty cool, like being able to like give him a little bit of the hookup and stuff. And then he would also be like, Mom, why did do? And I'd be like, I'll explain it to you. But
I am so
it's
glad
been
you
interesting
mentioned that.
even watching their gaming behaviors. Like they used to be far more into like competitive gaming, and now they're way more like my younger son literally used to play Siege. when he was far too young to play Siege. And now he's like a Roblox dude because he likes to just hang out with his friends and goof off. And it's like I see them both like leaning more into the social aspects of games. So my older son, he'll like for him, like Terraria is retro gaming for an 18-year-old. So like that's how he like bonds with his buddies that are
No.
like, yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
Okay, that
that.
hurts.
Yeah, I know. See?
That hurts.
But also just yeah, like how like it's not always great to have your what's it like use case of one, but I'm always like I think they're pretty representative of like shifts in like player behavior and awareness behavior, like how do they find out about things, like what games do they gravitate to and why, like what are reasons that they might not competitively play when they used to, what are reasons, that's really interesting to like dissect what goes on in the household.
Now you mentioned Destiny 2, and I saw Daniel's heart sink.
I want to talk about it.
So from your time that you were at Bungie, I guess the general question that he and I both have is just what was it like working at Bungie, and what in the world happened with Destiny?
I'll answer the first part of that. I mean, Bungie is, what's awesome about Bungie? They are so freaking smart. Like immediately you're just like, huh, like we're moving. Like
Well,
we're
they've been in the game for a while now.
yeah, yeah. And you still have leaders that like, touched Halo or helped with it, like launching Destiny 1 and like so that part is incredible. They care a lot about the people that work there. They have like a very open culture in that way, like especially for being a studio so big. So I really admire the teams and the leadership at Bungie. So that part was super awesome. In terms of like honestly what happens within the game itself, again, like I don't even, everybody has their own opinions on different games and how they've changed and evolved. And I think I'll just like remind everybody like what I started this with of like it's really hard and complicated to get tons of people to be aligned on a single thing, right? And so that's every single game team out there, and sometimes it works in your favor as a player and sometimes you're like, "Oh, what's that?" But I will say that Bungie passionately cares about the players and listens to them. I actually give them a lot of credit for that, like after seeing it from the inside, like how quickly they try to respond to what's going on. So I have hella respect for Bungie. Yeah, it was awesome experience.
I do remember when I had spoken to Lewis, who started his own studio, that we came across the conversation of shareholders and investors and stuff, and how they have more involvement than people realize. How big is their influence? I'm
In
assuming you get
general
to
in the
see that.
industry,
Yeah.
shareholders, and yeah, I mean, I have said controversial things such as like, are games the right place for publicly traded companies? Because to be part of a publicly traded company, there's a lot of predictability that comes with that that's required in order to maintain like shareholder momentum. And I'm not saying that it's not, it's just like controversial question because like that fundamentally is the really, really hard part of games is like, how am I going to consistently grow a company and predictably do that in a way that I can like maintain shareholder confidence? And I think that that plays a part in yeah, all publicly traded companies are impacted certainly around like the long-term and short-term planning implications of like running a publicly traded business. And then even on the private side, that there's a lot to be said. I think the industry right now is like going through, and I'm like, this is kind of a beaten topic by now, but during COVID, we had low interest rates and tons of money flooding into games because everybody was playing games. And then those of us in games were like, I know they won't all stay, but we'll get more out of this than we had going in, surely, right? Like everybody will be like, oh my God, I forgot I love games and now I love games and I rediscovered them. And so I think everybody was surprised about how sharply everybody's like, no, I'm good. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to travel. And like, so we saw this huge, like, lots of money going in, lots of investment, lots of hiring, lots of new games being invested in, money, 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 private equity, publicly traded, all of it. And so what we're seeing right now is a big correction from that, where it was like we were wrong about how much the market could sustain. And we're getting back to sort of pre-COVID norms in terms of like growth in the games industry. And then therefore like what the industry size and scale needs to look like within that new framework. Yeah, so I think it's just like overall financial implications of stuff. Yeah.
Do you think that's what's also led to so many companies making a big push for live service games, maybe not wanting to let go of that revenue that they got to enjoy? And they were like, hey, you know what? Mobile games got it. Let's see if we can, bring that over here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you talk about a sustainable, predictable business, then having like some sort of recurring revenue that that you can rely on, like helps with that, like creating that, okay, I know how much we make and how much we spend, and therefore I know that we can do these things and maybe invest in new products in these ways. And so there's like a smart, like thesis behind that, right? But it may not always show up great for players or in products.
Correct me if y'all maybe think differently, but it seems to me like coming out of COVID after this past couple years, we saw an explosion with battle royales and live service games, in-game microtransactions. Because there were more people, there was more money coming in, there was more eyes on it, and it was what was popular. Now, and I think the last couple years have really showcased that with gaming awards. We're seeing a much bigger push now for story-driven games, more particularly story-driven games you can play with a friend and socialize with versus battle royales. It feels like battle royales are kind of going down. Fortnite's hanging in there. They're fun. It's a fun game though. It's fun. But story-driven games, Clair Obscur, Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring. This is just my observations, but I'm loving it. I'm loving story-driven games and turn-based games becoming something that's people are more excited about.
Well, I will say, like, to just try to go toe for toe against some of those, like, free-to-play live service games is a huge financial undertaking. So high risk, potentially high reward. But I think I saw the stat the other day that, like, since Valorant, we actually haven't seen one, like, pop. So the ones that have tried to compete at that scale, like, haven't actually hit.
Since
And
Valorant?
so, since Valorant, 5 years, I think. Yeah, like at that scale, at that, like, sort of AAA free-to-play, live service focused, like shooter game at least. And so in terms of like that business thesis, like things that aren't that are a little bit easier to manage both on like the opportunity predictability side as well as like the cost side potentially.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear you like it.
Yeah, because even with Marvel Rivals, it came out with a bang. When you think about it, it kind of fizzled out before like even a year. So
yeah, I don't know enough about their engagement metrics, and like I'm sure that it's still a sound business for them, but yeah.
So Midwest Games, you guys have already helped, from what I saw, you guys have some games already that you've helped publish out there. Is there anything that you would like to let developers know, like, how they can get in contact with you and I guess the beginning steps that they, to get
reaching out to Midwest.
Yeah. So Midwest was founded as a just more prototypical games publisher where we picked up games and published them on the platforms. And then I joined as an advisor specifically on the shadow publishing stuff. So the services side where it is the for hire model. And that's definitely the focus right now. So I'd say if you're a developer and you realize like, oh my, I need publishing help, then please come chat with us. Check out the website. And there's ways to get a hold of us like through email and form submittals there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I obviously love talking about this stuff. I probably a little bit too much, but we're pretty friendly, like to share information pretty freely and would love to help you.
Yes. And thank you so much for joining us. There's not enough time to pick your brain for this. But I know you are a busy woman, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But I would definitely love to have you back for a future conversation down the road. So thank you
absolutely.
so much.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a joy talking to y'all, and I would love to be back. There's always more to talk about.
Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And
yeah, I definitely loved your passion. Seeing someone in the gaming industry that loves what they do, I think is so amazing.
Yes, 100%.
Appreciate that. Well, I hope y'all get some awesome achievements.
Yeah.
between now and the next time I see you.
Gonna hop on PlayStation and grab me some more. But thank you everybody so much for tuning in. And if you guys haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button so you guys know the next time we have an amazing interview on the GZ Chop Shop Gaming Podcast. Take care of yourself and each other. And we will catch all you wonderful people on the next episode. Later.